morning, everybody. And thank you to Senator Graham and Senator Warren for joining us here.
Is my microphone on now? Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Again, thank you for joining us. We are going to kick off the session and the day talking about this notion of strategic competition in the world today, that Russia and China have come back as major great power competitors to the United States, and what should the United States do about it? How should we think about the nature of that competition and where things go from here? And so to discuss these issues, we are privileged to have two genuine leaders in the United States Senate, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Lindsey Graham. They're well known to everybody in this room and beyond, so I'm going to do the briefest of introductions and then dive right in. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina was elected to the Senate in 2002 after serving in the House of Representatives. He retired from the Air Force Reserves 3 years ago as a colonel after having served in uniform for some 33 years. He serves on the Armed Services Committee and chairs the Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the State Department and foreign aid. Senator Elizabeth Warren was elected in 2012 by the people of Massachusetts. She serves on the Armed Services Committee as well, and not incidentally, on the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, where she's been particularly active on economic policy issues. Senator Warren previously chaired the Congressional Oversight Panel for the TARP program following the global financial crisis, and was for 3 decades a professor of law, especially at Harvard University. These are two of the foremost leaders in the U.S. Senate today and in American political life today. I'm going to start off a conversation up here. We'll get, after a while, to questions from the floor. You can also tweet questions if you'd like to do that. The hashtag is CNAS 2018. But let me just dive right in and ask you, Senator Warren, maybe to start out. The national security strategy and the national defense strategy, I think a lot of the consensus around Washington now is that when you look at the tiers of challenges and threat to American national security, terrorism, failed states, Iran, North Korea, all these other things, the challenge posed by great powers, Russia and China, is at the very top, and that's the one that we really need to focus on. You can tell us maybe, one, how, if you think that's right, and then two, when you talk to Americans and your constituents, how are they seeing the threats and challenges to the United States?
So I think it is right that China and Russia are the place we need to put a lot of our focus. And I think it's about the focus on how they pose threats to the United States. And they're not the same. Just the fact that they're big and have nuclear weapons does not mean it's the same kind of challenges. So you watch China using its kind of whole of government so that it's the Chinese government officially, it's all of their companies, it's every way that it stretches around the globe. And China kind of simultaneously is aggressive within its own region. It's clearly the big player, and it wants to be the dominant player in the region. So for example, in March, I was in Japan, and the Japanese talked about the fact that multiple times a day, the Chinese fly into Japanese airspace, and the Japanese have to scramble and get up to defend their airspace. It's going on virtually every single day, more than once a day. Talk about islands Japan controls, and the Chinese so-called fishing fleet, which is really outfitted like an arm of the military, surround the island, keep dominating and showing pressure. It's kind of this flair that China has. And then at the same time, the Belt and Road approach has given China this extraordinary opportunity to dominate other countries and bring them into their orbit without ever having to land a single boat or fire a single shot. Sri Lanka, lend them lots of money. Turns out they can't pay it back, come and seize many of the assets and have a much more powerful influence on government. When Senator Graham and I were in Pakistan, do you remember the series of questions we had? Pakistan was touting basically about $30 billion is going to be coming in from China. And when I started asking about, so how are you going to be able to repay that? And they said, not to worry, they're building this whole power infrastructure and they will own it. And just think about what that means. A country where a quarter of your power is owned by a foreign country, and the next time you're in negotiations and you don't like how you want Pakistan to do something that's more in China's interest, how about the capacity to be able to say, we're going to turn off the power in a huge part of your country? So China has gotten very, very aggressive and has been very smart in terms of using different tools available to it. Russia comes at this from a little different angle. Obviously, as we saw in Crimea, Russia is willing to use its conventional weapons. It's willing to cross a border and then brazen it out that no, you know, these are our folks. They obviously still have dreams of when the Soviet Union was a great power. They're pushing on territory. At the same time that they're willing to use sort of what you think of as 20th century technology and force and approach, they may very well be the leaders in asymmetric warfare, the idea of cyber warfare. They're the ones who have launched a direct attack on the United States, attacked our voting system. And so they're moving in two different directions. All of that is by way of saying we have to assess where the threats come from and then think about what the tools are that we have. So that at least gets us started. I don't want to talk too long without letting Senator Graham weigh in.
Well, I bet that's good.
Saw a lot of nodding over there.
Yeah, that's good. So, like, Russia doesn't have a whole lot of money.
Right.
China does. There are a bunch of people in China. There's not so many in Russia, so that's one big thing. So, like with China, the TPP, I think, is a mistake on our part. Part of it's showing up in the region. I think Russia feels surrounded by NATO. China doesn't feel surrounded by us. There's not kind of a NATO alliance. So what they're doing is building up the military. They're trying to have a deep water navy so they can project, hey, you need to remember who's the big dog over here. The Japanese, everybody else, they're trying to drive us out of South Korea. Over my dead body will we do that. I don't know what the old Chinese empire looks like. I can't go that far back. McCain could. He was probably there. But the Russian Soviet days, we know what that looks like. So I think you have a fossil fuel economy in Russia.
Yeah, an extraction economy.
Right. That's, you know, they've got, both of them have weaknesses. Rather than talking about how strong they are, let's talk about how weak they are. They have a coastal economy, not so much in the interior in China. They have to wake up every day and figure out how to keep 1 billion people from rioting and taking over the country. We wake up every day trying to figure out how we can work together. So I just hope the president understands that Russia is not going to stop until they pay a higher price. Russia's in the Mideast, China's in Africa. China's trying to use soft power to dominate Africa. Russia is trying to intimidate its neighbors to break up alliances. China is trying to work with the Europeans against us. The Russians are trying to break NATO and the European Union. China is pretty clever in this regard. They're trying to be the capitalist force on the planet. They're against tariffs. They're for free trade on their terms. So I find it kind of odd that China is trying to isolate us from our allies because we're sort of overplaying our hand on trade, and Russia is trying to break the alliance. So between Brexit, the Five-Star Movement in Italy and Poland and Hungary, there's a sort of a deterioration of the liberal democracies with a small d, and Russia is trying to exploit that. But I would say one thing, Africa is worth fighting for, not on the battlefield, but to show up. And my big concern is that we're going to lose our influence in Africa to China, and that would be a big mistake and very preventable.
But doesn't what you're saying really, though, take us to the question of what are the tools we've got? Where is it that
100%.
that we can push back? And part of it, just to pick up on your point about the economics, is that we need a strong economy at home. I think this is an important part of our foreign policy. We want to be safe outside. We got to have a strong economy at home. And I believe a strong economy means we've got to have a prosperous middle class, working poor, poor, opportunities, so that people here at home feel like they've got a real stake in this economy, and it's it's going to move
Right.
forward. That then creates the conditions where America can do more around the world. So I think of our tools, and I think of our military tools, you've obviously talked about. I think about the economic competition, you've raised that one, but also our diplomatic tools. That the idea that the State Department should be hollowed out, that's our eyes and ears on the ground.
Right.
Those are the people. I'm not just talking about the confirmable spots, the ambassadors. I'm talking about the eyes and ears on the ground, all those mid-level positions from people who know the language and know the economy and know the history and know the local politics, who inform us in every one of these places around the world. And so I worry that if you think of it as our tools are military, economic, diplomatic, and our alliances, that we're not keeping our tools as sharp as we should, that we're not investing in our tools in the way we should.
And you got to remember what this last election was about. If you add up the Bernie voter and the Trump voter, what kind of foreign policy do you have? Inward looking, right? We're spending too much over there. We need to spend more here. We're carrying too many burdens over there. People should do more for themselves so we can focus back here. So these things go in cycle, right? And so what I'm trying to do with the president is America First can be many things, and depending on the day it is.
Or time of day.
Yeah, so burden sharing, count me in. NATO is contributing more, the countries. The president's right, they should pay more, right? We're in Afghanistan. Most of the mineral resources in Afghanistan, about $1 trillion, the Chinese have an upper hand. We're to go to the Afghan government. What are you doing? I don't see any Chinese soldiers here fighting. So the whole idea of trying to reset alliances and make sure that we're being helped more, not less, I think most Americans buy into. The idea of withdrawing our forces from over there and bringing them back here, I don't like that because that makes us, I believe, less safe. Why do you have 4 deployments? As a line of defense against terrorism. There's no wall you can build between us and the Mideast. We can build one along the southern border. In some places it makes sense. But how do you keep the Mideast threats over there and make sure they don't come here? You're going to have 4 deployed forces, but this whole government approach. Africa, we don't have many troops in Africa. The foreign aid budget is 1% of the entire federal budget. So what I'm trying to convince the president of, how does soft power, foreign aid, fit into America First? I think it is essential. If you're tired of having a lot of bombs dropped on people, count me in. There's some of that going to be necessary for a long period of time. I'm trying to convince the president and his team that to win the war on terror, you got to have a hopeful life to compete with a glorious death. And if you bomb and leave, like Syria, what do you expect to happen? They'll come back. So there's a real debate here among ourselves about the role we play in the world. What was this election about? Should we leave Afghanistan? Does it really matter when we leave? I think so. So these are conversations. And about Elizabeth, I've traveled with her to Iraq and Afghanistan, and she's one of the senators who spends her time out there to learn about keeping us safe here. And here's what impresses me the most is the reception she gets from the military. Oh. They really do appreciate you coming. Because I think me and you probably have different views on many things.
One or two.
One or two, but when we show up, it's reassuring to those who do the fighting, so thank you for coming.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. You know, I always felt like one of the points, we were with John McCain when we were in UAE and Pakistan and Afghanistan, almost exactly a year ago right now, that John would get me by the sleeve and pull me over to make sure when we were talking with foreign leaders,
yes,
that they understood on basic principles that you read a lot in the papers about the differences we have, but on these basic principles and our commitment to the safety of the United States, there's not a difference between us.
if John didn't fire you on a daily basis, you're doing better than I was when I worked for him. But but that was sort of my.
I thought maybe you were going to pick up and say, but then when you get down to the details, there's some big differences.
Well,
but,
yeah. But
well, in your case, very good reasons. Most every
there we
day.
go.
But I want to get back to the politics of this. You talked, Senator Graham, about the Trump voters and the Sanders voters who have more of build bridges at home, not bridges over there, kind of less is more sort of approach to the world. I'm interested both in what you think sort of the American people at large, beyond those particular sets of voters, where they are. I mean, are they tired of the wars? Are they tired of military intervention, skeptical of free trade, more inward looking after the Bush and Obama administrations, or not? Can we sustain this kind of very active foreign policy? And then also within your own parties, I mean, what is Republican foreign policy today? What is Democratic foreign policy today?
Well, here's what I tell people. How many of you believe they would kill us all if they could? How many of you believe that the reason 3,000 of us died on 9/11 is they couldn't find a way to kill 3 million of us? How many of you believe you may be tired of fighting them, but they're not tired of fighting you? Almost everybody raises their hand. Because you got to put it in context of what the threat is. If they could have found a way to kill more people other than airplanes, they would do it. So where they're likely to get these weapons, North Korea and Iran. Some really rogue states out there with a bunch of chemical, biological, nuclear material is probably not a good combination for all of us. Whether North Korea will use it or not, I have no doubt they'll sell it to somebody one day if they needed the money. So I try to make foreign policy about us. I try to make foreign policy about the threats are real, whether you may be tired of these threats, but the day you let your guard down is a bad day for all of us. On September the 10th, we didn't have one soldier in Afghanistan, didn't have an embassy, not one dime of foreign aid. And the point I'm trying to make is we were leaving them alone, but they didn't leave us alone. Now, Russia is not going to invade us, but they're going to get away with as much as they can, as long as they can. And they're going to disrupt alliances that benefit the world because they don't want to be part of the world as we know it. China is hungry and ambitious, and democracies in their wake are very worried. So I don't think there's a substitute for us. We're not the world's policemen, but here's what I say. We're the glue that holds the world together. And when you find us absent, seldom does anything grow well without us being there. And you may not like the role we play in the world or my view of it, but I'm all in. If you like John McCain's vision of the world, you'll like my vision because that's what I believe in.
Can I just ask Senator Graham, just quickly before we go to you, Senator Warren, so what you described, the worldview you just described, are you an outlier on the Republicans these days, or is that generally where the Republicans are?
I think there's a consensus. I don't see a lot of calls to get out of Afghanistan. I don't see, Democrats have been great on keeping our presence in Syria. I haven't had one Democrat say that we should take our 2,200 troops out of northern Syria and remove them. So I don't see a groundswell of retreat by anybody. Does that mean people want more? I'm not so sure about that.
I also don't think that hearing 2 days ago on Afghanistan showed a lot of support on either side of the aisle for continuing same old, because it's not working. And part of the problem we've got is that we've got a government that is not supported by its own people. Corruption is rife. They don't control, what, more than about 60, 65% of the space.
You're talking about us or Afghanistan?
I'm talking about Afghanistan. And that just in the past few years, that the Taliban has expanded its control. But I tell you what, here's the part I see about this.
So what would you do different?
So how I think about this is I just think about it a little bit differently. When you describe what it is Americans want, I think we start at the same place. We want to be safe. And that means we want to be safe from invasion from another country. It means we want to be safe from terrorism. It means we want to be safe, by the way, from cyber attacks. And to say Russia's not going to invade us, Russia attacked us. They came in, and we know that there's absolutely no ambiguity about this. They have attacked us, and let's be clear, they have paid no price for it. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, And I think this goes to your question. People want something that works here at home. They want an economy that works for them. They want to know that
I got
their
that, but
kids
what
are
would
gonna-
you do
No,
different
but
in
I think-
Afghanistan?
But I think this fits together. And the question we have to face in Afghanistan is, where is the plan? The President of the United States now has it. He says he put more people in. What was the plan when he put more people in? We asked in an open hearing, so what's the plan? I went back and quoted during the Q&A. Just starting since 2010, how many leaders, our leaders, military leaders in Afghanistan have come in and said, we're turning the corner here. We're turning the corner here. I quoted the turning the corner. We have turned the corner so many times we have gone in circles in Afghanistan. You just keep turning the corner. There has to be a plan. We can't ask our military to solve a problem that takes other than military tools to get it done. When you and I were there, we recognized this. So I think what this goes to, and this is where I see the big difference between us.
Well, what's your plan?
I'm a pragmatist. I want to use all the tools, right? You've got to talk about all the tools. The president put more people in Afghanistan. He needs a plan to do that.
Okay.
All right, where's his plan? Because every place around the world that we talk about terrorism, we have to talk not about how I get you about we don't bomb and leave, and I'm glad to hear you say that, Lindsay, but it's also what are the conditions that create terrorism to begin with? The question is not whether or not there's one person somewhere who'd like to hurt the United States. It's how big it is and how widely supported it is in a region. And when there's no hope, there's a lot of that.
I'll tell you my plan for Afghanistan. We ain't leaving until it's safe to leave. And if that's 100 years from now, it's 100 years from now.
So how are you going to measure safe to leave?
Well, by making sure that it doesn't become a safe haven to launch another attack on our country. That's one.
So wait a minute. If it's about safe havens, it's about
That's
places
part
not
of
under
it.
control. Well, let me just ask then does that mean we should be in Yemen? Does that mean we should be, can we start naming the countries? Somalia, failed states, lots of places where terrorists could hide out. Or you could make the point that in the 21st century, that they don't even have to be in a place, that people are electronically connected, that the folks who are doing the planning can do it. Can do it through the...
Forward deployed forces are a line of defense, but it's not your only defense. You need intelligence gathering because most of these people don't care about dying. The difference between Yemen and Afghanistan is where the war was planned. It's where it was launched from. So what would happen if after all these years they beat us in Afghanistan? Here's my plan is not to lose. My plan is not to tell the terrorists, you can wait us out, you can wear us out, all you got to do is keep fighting and we will leave. Now, what's winning in Afghanistan? It is when they have more capability than they have today, when they have a government that's more effective, when a woman has more say about her children than they do today. The bottom line is the Afghan security forces are better than they were right after the Taliban fell. There are more women in school, but not enough. All I can tell you is that this is a generational struggle. We as a nation, have had our own civil war. Democracy is hard. I hope they're not watching C-SPAN because they may turn away from democracy. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's not about when you leave, it's about what you leave behind. And here's the plan. The plan is to wear these guys out. Kill as many of them as you can and build up other people who will say no. Here's why I think we'll win. Most people over there don't buy what these nut jobs are selling. They don't. I find very few parents who want to turn their daughters over to ISIS if they don't have to. So what are we going to do? We're going to hold their hands, work with them, take one step forward, a half step backward. And one day, I probably won't live to see it, this ideology will become an ember, not a flame. Over the arc of time, the more educated the public, the more they have to live for, the less likely they want to join up to die for something else. It's going to take a long time, but we're going to win.
Senator Warren, you guys were doing lots of vigorous nodding about 5 minutes ago, and now it's sort of shaking heads and shrugging and things like that. So I want to give you an opportunity to speak about what you think we should do in Afghanistan, if you'd like. Then I'm going to ask one more question and then go to the audience. So you guys be thinking of your brilliant questions for the senators.
So let me just say, I understand the aspiration of what you say, but we cannot simply declare that because we are using this tool, this is the tool that's going to help us succeed. Look, I'm just a pragmatist. I look at the evidence of what we've got. And the evidence of what we've got right now is fewer than half of all Afghan children are actually in school. The support for the government has not strengthened, it has deteriorated. The amount of land that the Taliban controls has increased rather than decreased. I think we have to ask the fundamental question of whether or not our military, especially where we have it now,
what would happen if we left?
Is what is effective.
Well,
then Lindsay, are you telling me the president just increased troops? And the question
I would actually send more.
Is to what end?
To make sure security is maintained, to repair all these problems? Is that going to
cause the people of Afghanistan to suddenly support a corrupt government?
No, they'll find
one
they can support.
Then is it our job to put a new government in?
No.
Then you're asking the military to fix a non-military problem.
No, what you're doing.
Our military does its dead level best. They're fabulous. They do everything we ask them to do. But there is only a limited amount that the military can do. And I think
Germany and Japan
has shown us
that
problem.
Were former enemies that were obliterated. So what did we do? We stayed there militarily. We had the Marshall Plan. And over 50, 60, 70 years, you got allies. This is much harder because Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world.
We stayed there militarily to protect them from the Soviet Union, not to fight internally with Germany.
You don't think the Nazis would have come back if we'd have left?
Stay. Actually, I think we were there mostly because of the Soviet threat. And I think that's why we stayed across Europe.
While we're in Japan.
Let me move to one last question. I have to say, I'm enjoying this so much. And I was going to get a cup of coffee.
I'm for the Marshall Plan. We should do one in Africa, by the way.
All right, so let me ask one last question.
How about back to the Marshall Plan? Can we both nod at Marshall Plan?
So wide agreement on the Marshall Plan.
Good.
The president is in a diplomatic negotiation with North Korea. I guess we all hope that this is successful in total denuclearization of North Korea. There we go.
It's the Russians.
If for some reason this process fails, they do not denuclearize whatever the problem is, what is the alternative that the president should seek with respect to North Korea? Senator Warren?
Well, look.
I got a plan.
I've heard hints of your plan. So.
I'll bet. Look, a year ago, we were afraid we were on the path to war, and I'm very glad to see the administration turn toward diplomacy. I think that's the right approach for us to use, but we're back to this problem. You've got to keep all the tools in the toolbox sharp, and that means we need a State Department that eyes and ears on the ground, that fully understand this, that understand the history of it, and that engage in the painstaking step-by-step pieces to get us to denuclearization. What worries me about what's happened in North Korea is a theater is not the same as diplomacy. Showing up and taking pictures is not the same as working out a detailed diplomatic solution. And when the president starts out by giving away important things for nothing in return, then we're in a weakened place for diplomacy. So if you don't have a full team on the field and the president says, oh yeah, think about the fact now that China for years keeps referring to our practice exercises with our allies, South Korea and Japan. They keep referring to those as provocative. Americans have not called that provocative. We've called it practicing with our allies, and it's been an important part of keeping our allies not only stitched to us, but trying to stitch them to each other so that there is true strength in the region and some pushback against China. the President of the United States shows up, embraces Kim Jong-un, and then is talking about America's actions with our allies as provocative, picking up the language from China and Kim Jong-un. That does not put us in a stronger position. That is not using our diplomatic tools effectively.
Okay.
So Senator Graham,
Here's the other side of the story. We're not one diplomat short of solving the North Korean problem. We've done multilateral negotiations, bilateral negotiations. Madeleine Albright danced with his father, that didn't work. We sent Dennis Rodman over, I can't believe that didn't work. So here we are, after like 30 years of talking and dancing and interacting. They've got more bombs, not less. They've got more missiles, not less. Now what's the difference? President Trump, whether he should have or not, and I actually think he should have, has drawn a red line in North Korea. Do y'all agree with that? That we will never allow the marriage of a ICBM with a nuclear weapon on top that can effectively hit America. That's a non-starter for us. I like that. Now, why do I care so much? I'm not so sure he would do this on any given day, hit Los Angeles or any other American city, but I do believe North Korea has a very dangerous history of proliferation. That they're a cash-starved country. Everything they build, they sell. And if you don't stop him now, 20 years from now, he'll have hydrogen bombs, not plutonium bombs. He'll have more missiles, not less, because he believes this is the best way to survive. And what we got to convince him of is you're better off without your nuclear force than you are with it. Now, how do you do that? Well, if you need to go talk to him, fine. If you need to do a video of what condos would look like in North Korea, I don't care what we do. I don't want a war because it'd be devastating. But here's what I'm willing to say to you and everybody else in the Congress. If diplomacy fails this time around, there's no place left to kick the can. If this breaks apart and they go back to their old way of doing business, I think President Trump needs to bring this threat to an end because Iran is watching. Everybody is watching.
So let's just say a word about diplomacy, though, on this. If diplomacy is our last best hope here, then we ought to do it at our maximum capacity, and that means you don't give away things up front.
What have we given away?
Oh, come on. When the President of the United States calls our actions with our allies provocative and then says we'll stop doing them, that's giving up a really big negotiating chip that we might have used to get something in return. To walk away and say, Kim Jong-un made promises to make promises. These promises weren't even as strong as the last round of promises they broke or the round of promises before that. That's not taking diplomacy seriously. And if you don't have lots of people, if you don't have a full State Department to support this, that's a problem. But there's one more part. I just have to throw in. There's one more part. It's hard to negotiate this at the same time that we back out of the JCPOA. You know, America made a promise. And America said, so long as you, Iran, will do this, we, America, will stay in and do this. President Trump certified that they had done their part of the bargain and then said, but we're going to back out. What does that say to Kim Jong-un about diplomacy? What does it say to, you said the rest of the world is watching? Mm-hmm. The rest of the world is watching every time we go into a negotiation ill-prepared or every time we break a promise. And if we really believe that our strength is more than simply our military is important, but if we think it's about economics and diplomacy and allies, we have to think about the implications of every one of these actions, and I think they're bad for the United States.
Let's get back to civics. America didn't make a promise to the Iranians. The Obama administration did, and a majority of the House and Senate voted against the agreement. It's not a treaty. It's non-binding. So here's what I would recommend. If they do get an agreement with North Korea, bring it to Congress and let's treat it as a treaty. If you can't sell 67 of us, it's probably not that good a deal. So what I want to just stress to you as much as I can, Elizabeth, I don't see any other way out of this mess other than bringing it together through some diplomatic solution or going to war. Because we've gone too far down the road in terms of their capability in North Korea to disrupt the region and threaten the homeland. So before Trump got there, everybody tried everything known to mankind and it didn't work. The only reason I think we're here today is they think that Trump would use military force if he had to. I want everybody in this audience to understand, I think he would too. And I would encourage him to keep that option on the table because these are bad choices. Here's your really bad choice. Fold yet again. There's three outcomes: peace, war, capitulation by the United States, to go back to the old way of talking tough and doing nothing different. So here's what I hope. I hope that we can get China to help us more this time than they have before. I hope we can convince him that he'll be safe and secure doing a deal with us to give up his nukes. I don't want to invade North Korea. I don't want to unify the peninsula. I don't want to bring democracy to North Korea as my primary goal. I'll give him the security guarantees that he's been longing for and prosperity that will make him and everybody else better. But if that doesn't work, my question to you and others in the House and the Senate, would you back military force as a last resort if these negotiations fail?
All right, on that note, let's go to the audience, take some questions. I bet North Korea may come up again, but there are plenty of other issues as well. Charlie Dunlap, wait for the microphone to come around, so right here, and please identify yourself and make a statement that ends in a question mark, please.
Senators, thank you very much. I wish the American people could see this, people with different views expressing them, but doing it in the right way. Charlie Dunlap from Duke University. Changing gears a little bit, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the all-volunteer force and that the military seems to be becoming this, quote, warrior caste. Since the draft doesn't seem viable, is there anything that we can do to ensure that the burden is spread to a larger portion of our population? The Congressional Research Service recently said that 44% of new recruits are coming from the South. Is that a problem or not, or is there
not for me?
Yes, I think it is a problem. And I think that as a nation, we all need to be in this. Look, all three of my brothers served in the military. My oldest brother was career military, 288 combat missions in Vietnam. I lived in a family that honored the military. Obviously, Lindsay served. I think it's important, and one thing that I've actually stressed with some of our military leaders is the importance of recruiting everywhere, including in New England.
Yes.
And I have pushed on this. You've got to get out there, and you've got to be willing to talk to people, and you've got to be willing to talk to people who are not the typical targets. And that raises a second point for me. And that is what the military looks like going forward. What all of our military, who we're recruiting, where we're investing our money. Here's what worries me most about where we are. We keep polishing up and building and strengthening a military of the 20th century. What we need is to address the threats that will hit us in the 21st century, and we need the capacity to do that. That means we need a lot more investment in research and development. It means we need a lot more investment in artificial intelligence, in robotics. We need people who are ready for the threats that are already have hit the United States and the coming threats. We have got to stop looking at our military in terms of counting. How many of these do we have and how many of those? No, it's about how much capacity do they have? What can they do? What can a warfighter do when that person is in the field? What can a plane do? What can a ship do? And here's what troubles me. I say this, I raise this in hearings until Lindsay falls asleep when I start to ask questions, because he knows I'm going to go down this same path about the importance of research and development and of recruiting different kinds of people all kinds of people into the military, including lots with technical backgrounds. And the problem is, our military leaders, bless them, they will sit there and they say, yes, definitely, boy, I'm in favor of the future. And then here comes the budget over from the Pentagon. And it's got increases, except in R&D, which China has maybe a little bit more or a little bit less, or they've poked other things into it to make it look like R&D and it's not really R&D. We have to, as a country, I think, get much more aggressive in insisting that our military not only reflect who we are, but reflect the sharpest, furthest edge of our thinking, of our research, to be able to counter the threats that I guarantee you are coming our way.
So, in full disclosure, he was my boss in the Air Force, so
Okay.
that was a good question. So when you look, real quickly, when you look at eligible people for the draft, you know, the fighting age from 18 to 29 or whatever it is, the number of people who are physically qualified is pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people have
Well, lower than it should be.
lower than it should be. You know, we got healthcare problems out there. Young people, diabetes.
I
It's
know.
harder.
Let's do national health care.
There you go.
There you go.
Solving
tried that
problems right
other-
and left here.
The places that do that
Healthcare
have
for all.
healthcare for all in one boat. So here's the deal. I think recruiting needs to be more diverse. Like General Kelly's from Boston. He's my kind of guy from Boston. The bottom line is
He roots for the Sox.
the 1% have really taken it on the chin here. Lifting sequestration was the best thing we could do. We need about 520 in the Army. What does that matter? It means that you don't rotate as much. It means you can have a better presence throughout the world without wearing people out. We need 350 ships, not 278, so you can actually show up in Asia. We grounded 50% of the fighter squadrons because they didn't have enough time to train. What we did during sequestration is bled our own military dry. And it's the worst thing that's happened since I've been in Washington. That's behind us now. Count me in for more R&D, because the wars of the future are going to be more asymmetrical. There are going to be more cyber threats. I am with you 100,000%, but here's what we do need. Enough people to make sure that the ones who do volunteer are not worn out.
Yep.
The equipment they need to win. I'm not looking for a fair fight, folks. I want it to be overwhelming so nobody in their right mind will go to war with us. And I want to make sure those who are doing the fighting have a little more time with their family, get paid a little bit more, and have the best that we can offer them before the enemy gets it.
That's a great note of consensus on which to close. I wish we could keep the conversation going longer, but the senators have to get back to do the people's work here. In a moment, we're going to have a 15-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene here for a talk by former Deputy Secretary of Defense and current CNAS Defense Counselor Bob Work, entitled "So This Is What It Feels Like to Be Offset: How America's Strategic Competitors Are Trying to Beat Us at Their Own Game." So you'll want to be back for that. But before we break, this is really a model of the way two of our foremost political leaders can carry on a conversation about the most important issues, agreeing sometimes, disagreeing sometimes, but doing it civilly and in a bipartisan way. So please join me in thanking Senator Warren and Senator Graham.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.